Hi everyone, this is Tony Leonard, and today I wanted to give a demo just about some of the drawing tools that I use, pens, brush pens, markers, for when I draw, as some people have been asking me what do I use and what do I like to use and why. So I thought to do like a short little like pen test and sort of show you some of the things that I use. And after that, I also want to talk about some really cool books. I have a stack of books here that I wanted to show you guys, and just things that if you get your hands on them have been inspirations to me over the years and or of recent. And so I'm going to show you some of that, and I'm also going to talk about some of the surfaces and papers that I've been using to draw stuff out. So I'm going to start with pens. Some of these are pretty common. Everybody uses them. Scott Robertson, I'm sure other people like, anybody who's a sketch artist or student likes to use these. I've been seeing a lot of other people post drawings where they've used some of the same tools, and so I thought I would just share, because for those that don't know. Okay, so I use Pilot Hi-Tec-C pens, and with these I wanted to talk about them because they're like a great technical pen, although I have some other like felt technical pens that I like to use. Even though these pens don't offer a whole lot as far as like difference in line weight. I mean, they come in different line weight sizes, but they're not going to give you the type of accentuated line that you may be looking for with something like a brush pen. But when you draw, and I like to hold my pen or pencil somewhat vertical when I do like quick dashing lines or draw down rough line work on, especially on stuff like hard surfaces. So I'm going to pin down on the paper and just draw like a few lines and give you an idea. Holding from the side, you're going to get sort of a scratchy line. And as you can see, I've only made a few lines here. They're not accentuated. So in other words, like if you were to even hold it up, press down, and give it a nice swoosh or whip, maybe at the bottom tip here, you're going to get some nice taper off of the line. But you're not going to get a whole lot. Not as much as you would with a thicker pen or with a more flexible pen. These are pretty hard tipped ballpoint gel pens. So that's one. So that's Pilot, and it's Hi hyphen tech, and generally C is the type that you want. And I have some other types of the Pilot Hi-Tech pens, those without a rubber grip. Generally the ones that I like to use, and when I draw, I will say this, I usually try to find pens or pencils that have a really good hand balance. So I like to feel them out and or test them on a strip of paper before I walk out of the store with them. These that have the rubber grip are really nice to use. There are also the C4s, which don't have the same type of rubber grip at the tip, but offer about the similar type of line. And there might be some price difference in between the two, but it's incremental. They're just about the same type of pen and the same maker, but with a scratchier line. Be careful, sometimes these tips come loose. There we go. But for fine line work or detail or abbreviation of detail, these lines are really cool. Or some like hatch work that you're going to do. Really great sharp pen to use. Great for roughs especially. And with these pens, I would make sure that they dry to the surface that you're using. I like to work on a lot of smooth, like hot press paper. So when I draw down on the surface, make sure that they dry so that when you use something like an alcohol marker, you're not picking up the black ink from the pen itself and smearing it along the drawing, because things become very unclean by then. So I'm just going to draw something somewhat geometric here in its shape. And again, because of the line weight being fixed, the way to work that line is probably, if you drew or draw over it, you can reinforce the line a little bit and make it a little bit thicker. So Pilot Hi-Tec-C is really great. I suggest them a lot. So I'm going to put those aside. And for other technical pens, you could probably pick up for very cheap someplace like Amazon, Stedtler pigment liner pens. These are really great pens for doing roughs and sketches and idealization drawings, dynamic drawings. They come in a set of like 5, 0.5, 0.1, 0.3, and 0.7, which the thicker ones, again, with that reinforcing the line trick, can give you some really bold, thicker lines. Drawing along the drawing ticks here to figure some things out. And depending on the speed of your stroke, you can kind of thin that down. So something like this here. So taking this, just drawing a rough box, my perspective. So something like this. You can see the kind of cross-hatching and or basic line that you can get out of pens like this. And they really hold up really well when you, especially if you're using this over alcohol marker. And it's pretty basic, but a good set. And they're disposable. So in other words, without having to buy the ink and the cleaner for the upkeep of something like Kohinoor or Rotring technical pens, Pilot Hi-Tec-C's, Stedtler pigment liners are both good choices for something like that. I mean, also I use Copic, their multiliners, and also their disposable multiliners, which are pretty good pens. These pens, especially the Copics, because of the fact that their markers will work with these, you can mark down stuff on paper. Like, I think this one is actually pretty dry, so I rarely use it. But again, like 0.03, 0.1, 0.5, these line weights, even though they're pretty thin, sometimes they're good for drawing down the line of silhouettes, guidelines, that sort of thing. And giving you some light weights that you can later reinforce. So just depending on what kind of coverage you're looking for, they're really great to use and to sort of find out your hand and your line of where you want to be. So Copic multiliners. And the good thing about this that I was going to mention is that along with using their markers, so like say if I took a C3 cool gray, when using them, they dry pretty quickly, and when you're adding values to your drawings, they're not going to pick up the ink and smear too much, which is great, because sometimes depending on the ink of the pen, I do have that problem, and it really, something like a brush tip on the Copics, it'll smear it and get your ink all over the place, and it makes the drawing really muddy and convoluted, and you have to cover up and hope for happy mistakes, which sometimes is a good thing, but also you want to be careful. So I'm going to say that the point 0.035 is a good point, and drawing along the surface here, these are really nice for quick dashing or swooping lines. Going along, reinforcing that line. So something like this, I'm just using on a hot press piece of paper again, and I like to draw quick lines, building out a silhouette or a form very quickly. A lot of sweeps, a lot of like little small drawing ticks to figure things out, where I want to draw next. But it's very good because they're very permanent on the paper, and especially hot press paper. You might have varying results with cold press papers or papers that have a lot more rag or tooth to them. And you might incur some bleed there, and you might want to just also be careful not to put your fingers too much in the way. As you can see on my hand, I'm wearing a smudge guard, the same that I would use for digital. But on paper, it also reduces some of the hand oils that you secrete naturally through your fingers and then get on the paper, because those oils will react with different inks. And besides smudgy, you always want to keep your work clean on the surface. The BS type of these Copic multi-liners, and by the way, those that are in the aluminum casing here, I've been told are refillable, so you can buy black ink and refill these. Probably, I haven't taken this one apart or tried to, but they are refillable, and so therefore you could really extend the life out of them as you use them. So for this, it's a felt brush pen with the BS, and it's very cool for doing sort of some value fills of just 100% black on whatever you're drawing. And again, if you want to kind of get some line weight out of it, you certainly can do that, because it's a little bit more flexible than, say, a Pilot Hi-Tec-C. So I'm going to put these aside. And lastly, I know some people like to use these. I don't use this pen as much, but there are the Sakura Pigma microns, and this one's a 0.5. Also, probably generally about the same, maybe a little juicier on the tip as far as like the amount of charged ink flow, but certainly handy for almost the same type of technical drawing, like whether you're doing concepting or doing actual like comic line art or commercial illustration. You can get some really clean results from pens like these, and for use with other media that might be wet, the ink pretty much stays pretty well. Again, that comes down to some of the surfaces that you use, whether you're using marker paper. I use two different types of marker paper that I'm going to talk about in a second. So I'm going to set these aside. And a big part of all of these drawings that I do are some of the brush pens that I like to use. So I'm going to tear this off, set this aside. And here I'm going to start with the Kuretake number 13 pen. Now this pen, I really love this pen. I've had this pen since probably 1999, and I've gone through probably maybe in and around 10 tips or so and countless refills. But it's really durable. It's very much a fine drawing tool. But the tips of these, they're white nylon hairs, so they're actually more like real hairs, and they make a more expensive version of this pen. I believe it's the model number 40 that has real sables hairs in it. So if you know anything about brushes, sables are for ink drawing and or watercolor are very fine hair. So with this, holding the guide towards my middle finger and controlling with my thumb and my index finger, almost like you would a chopstick almost. I try to keep the pen position upright and draw along the paper. So if I draw a few swooping or curved lines here, you can get the idea of the kind of line weight that you can get. Now the more you press down, the wider the hairs spread, and of course you can get some more kind of scratchy line. So in other words, like if anybody's knowledgeable or a fan of Shinkawa, the concept designer that does Metal Gear Solid, you'll get some nice scratchy lines in and around like this here, or this point here where I actually pressed down thin and then pressed thick and got like a thicker line. Now the slower you go, the more ink is going to sink into the paper, but if you did it quickly, you might get some unclean dash like here where it starts to taper off some of the edges. It's a reaction between the fiber of the paper and the spread of the hairs to the surface. So just depending on the touch that you want when you're drawing, you could try something like that. It's great for, you know, drawings like this, quick imaginative doodles where, let's say you're doing silhouette studies, you can still get like fills out of it. So when you get into form, you can figure out your form, use some positive negative space, and depending on the surface you can get some really small abbreviated detail. So for something like this, I could really get lost in drawing like this for a while. So I mean, it's really good for studies like this, especially if you're going to take these, use marker first and then lay down some brush strokes. It's really excellent for that. So I think I skipped over some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about with marker, but I'll get to that in just a minute. But like for example's sake, with brush or this brush pen, if I was to again mark down a form, flip this over, use the brush side, and I'm using a Copic C3. There, pretty much. I mean, sometimes with characters with hard surface helmets or something like that, I do it from a side view. It's easier to read and I can figure out the silhouette. So I can go ahead and reinforce the shape. So here, as you notice, I'm not using my arm so much as I am moving my hand in general from my forearm. I am using a lot of my wrist to try to get, you know, very tight detail. And I'm using the tip, and I'm balancing the tip, the very needle of the tip taper of the brush with my middle finger on the pad of paper. And here again is where you want to really be careful about your hand position, making sure that you don't get it in the way of any other wet spots of ink if you're using wet ink. Do a little fill. More detail. Turn your surface. And before you know it, even with a brush moving very quickly, you've worked out a lot of detail for yourself, or the impression of some detail. So things like this I'm going to probably talk about later in other demos, but for the sake of doing a short demo of this pen and why I love it, this is why I use this brush pen. It is very finite. Oh, see there again, I've put my finger in it. So I'm going to back up. Balance that out. And it doesn't dry totally quick, so you want to be careful and just keep in your mind where you're keeping your hand in your hand position. The hand position is always key, especially when you're doing ink drawings. But for quick doodles like this, using a brush pen in this fashion is really vital. And there you go. Okay, so that's the Kuretake number 13. I'll put that away, put this aside. And this pen here is become really popular. I know artists like Kim Jung-gi from South Korea, fabulous illustrator. He loves to use these. They're the Pentel pocket brush pen. They're black, and just like the previous Kuretake pen, if you unscrew the casing of the body, there is a refill on the inside. Refills always say FP10. Screw this back on. And you just insert the cartridge when you first buy it and press it down. You can get these pretty inexpensive on Amazon. And the pen itself, even if you were to go into a brick and mortar shop at an art store, the pen doesn't cost an excessive amount of money. But you can probably get them cheaper online. And it also has white nylon hairs, so if I was to draw sweeping lines like so, you can get a fair amount of detail out of these. So again, the Pentel pocket brush. Okay. And moving away from these smaller types of pens, there's also the Pentel, I believe this is Chumoji. It's the FL2L, large, like a Sumi styled pen. These come in different types, I believe thin ink and regular black ink, and I think they might make a few other colors like green, but it's a pretty simple and easy pen to use. And when you first buy them and you take them out of the package, you unscrew it, you remove a washer that's in between the actual brush tip and the ink cartridge, which is the entire handle, and then you screw it back on and give it just a gentle squeeze. Ink will fill in the well here and charge it all the way to the tip of the pen or the brush pen. And with stuff like this, I like to use this pen especially when working large on like a large piece of paper, or either on porous paper. Here's the thing with this thing. It has a very harsh flow of ink, so sometimes I like to keep a spare piece of paper on the side and take some of the charge out of it by just stroking it like so and pressing it down, and it'll remove some of the ink from the tip so that you can do this with a piece of tissue or a napkin, and it'll take some of the ink out, so that you can actually have an even flow in drawing. So like so, like so. I believe also artists like Shinkawa with Kojima Productions likes to use this pen when he does those great illustrations for Metal Gear Solid. Has a very nice, very hard black fill. So, just keep in mind with drawing something super thick like this, you can go thick to thin. Do some cross-hatching work. Really good for positive negative space drawing. And that's the Pentel Fudepen, right? Okay. But here again, since I've drawn on this, I'm going to have to be careful of my hand position, because these large black areas, if I was to turn the paper and show you in the light, you'll probably see a sheen. So that's still literally wet. It's soaked into the paper a bit, but if I was to turn it vertical, we might start to get some running because the ink laid down pretty heavy. So I'm going to cordon this off and not try to touch it so much. Also, if you're looking to do some wash work, I suggest this. We've already talked about these two, so I'm going to put these aside. Pentel Pocket Brush Pen, and of course the Kuretake pen. And I'm going to talk about these. I forgot where exactly I got this from or what brand it is. It's a Japanese made brush pen that has no ink. So in other words, just like that one, you can take off the refill container here, which is the body of the pen, and put in either your own ink, or do what I did, and that is take maybe a few small drops of actual ink, and the rest would be water. And so out of this, I'm able to get some very nice ink washes from this. So like, say if I was to barely touch some other lines that are still wet, I can blend in some of that 100% black into the wash that I'm doing. And so you can get some nice effects. Now, of course, when you use water on paper like this, you're bound to get some rippling, depending on coverage. So be careful. I know one of the recent sketchbooks that I got by the suggestion of Scott Robertson's material list in his tutorials is using the Cottonwood Arts paper. They make some very nice watercolor and or very soft hot pressed smooth paper in some of their sketchbooks. The paper is so thick that it really sucks up fluid like this, and it doesn't allow for a lot of buckling in the paper surface. So you might try something like that, or using a Bristol board with something like this would work fine. But just an empty refillable brush pen that you can put your own ink or ink wash water in. So I think it was like maybe like 2 or 3, maybe 2 parts ink, maybe just a few drops, and the rest would be water. Could take it down to like maybe 10-20% gray. But that is that. And also, I'm going to write these out on the paper here so that you can get them, because the label on these is in Japanese. I happen to speak Japanese, so I'm going to write it out in English. So the Futayaku, Futayaku Fudepen, or brush pen, is the one that I'm using in my hand now. And with this one, you have 2 sides. The side that I'm using here is 100% black, as you can see. But if you were to flip the pen over, it also has a thin ink side, so almost like this wash here. It's about the same type of value. You can get line, very nice sharp line. It's a white nylon tip again. A lot of brush pens that I like to use, they usually use white nylon either as a solid chisel tip, or white nylon as actual brush hairs. So you could put this down and then reinforce these lines with Hi-Tec-C or other technical pens. Really nice feel, well balanced, good to use. And I'll put that one aside. And the Kuretake Fudegochi pens. That's a mouthful. Kuretake. Now they're the same makers of the number 13 fountain brush pen, but these are Fudegochi pens. And I found these pens when I was in Japan, and I've been able to order them through the same carrier that I mentioned earlier, Jet Pens. So just as a note, Jet Pens, I believe it's jetpens.com. And with this, this pen is a little bit funky. It has a very nice line when doing some quick sketching or like semi-contour sketching, roughs. It's very nice feel. Quick dash, you know, not keeping the pen on the paper too long. But one of the caveats to using this pen is that it has a very inconsistent flow, and I don't know if that's because of the sea level pressure. Maybe, you know, in transit between shipping, they tend to maybe change pressure, and maybe the ink somehow is not sealed tight enough. But every once in a while, when I have it uncapped, it will start to bulb with ink on its tip. Now it has a nice white nylon tip, but sometimes you might want to be careful not to let it sit too long, or else you'll get that that buildup of ink on its tip, which may yield some undesired results when you lay it down on paper. So, however, its thicker counterpart here, this one has seen a little bit more action. It's the sign pen version of their, actually the thicker sign pen of their same Fudegochi series. This one is a little bit thicker, but you can get some of the same type of line out of it. Plus, if you use it sort of on its side, you can get some more broader, more random strokes out of it, depending on the pressure that you use. On paper. And for rough stuff like this, it has a really nice sort of dynamic feel to it. So check these two out. And that pretty much, this is just the same Futayaku pen that I used earlier. I'm going to put those aside. That pretty much covers some of the brush pens that I like to use. Other pens that I like to use, just offhand, are, I can't remember if these are Pentel, but in fact, yes, they are Pentel, and it's like sort of a sign pen. Pentel Tradio. These are really good for also just smaller doodles. Black ink. They have sort of a chiseled, pointed tip, but you can get some fine line and some slightly thicker line depending on how fast you're moving. Not the greatest when it comes to marker, but if you're not using marker at all, if you're doing just line sketches, these are, especially on the go, these are really great pens for marking down more notes than anything else, but you can do a little drawing with them. Maybe over marker if you use marker first and then these later, doing some thumbs or something like that. These are really great. Okay, so Pentel Tradeo markers. And also just a basic sign pen. I believe this is Pentel as well. They're called Pullaman, P-U-L-A-M-A-N. And again, similar type of chiseled tip with a little more weight to them. So like if you were to draw like so. I like things like this, especially like quick drawing tools. Like if I grab something off of my desk and I just want to make sort of like a visual thumbnail or note, these kinds of pens are indispensable. Okay. So moving right along, before this gets too long, pencils. Pencils are pretty much a standard thing. I don't use them very often, but when I do, I use woodless pencils, Monolith or Kuretake, mechanical pencils like this, like Stedtler. Again, anything that has really good balance in your hand is a plus. So, you know, pick them up, feel the weight. I use these with pencil holders. So in other words, when they get really small and they're kind of hard to put into a pencil sharpener, like an electric pencil sharpener, you can use something like this, or you can, you know, if you're using a sander, like when you do more traditional studies like in school, they're great because they don't have a lot of waste. There's no wood with a woodless pencil. It's just pure graphite straight on the surface, and there's no better way to get you know, like a lot of shading or value out of what you're drawing than using something like this. It's all in the hand, and actually with things like a woodless pencil, I like to use a kneaded eraser and use a blending stick with, because some of the values that you can get, depending on the actual grain of the paper, can have a really nice natural feel. So I'll take a rubbing stick and blend it out, and you can even do this sometimes over a marker, and it has a really great multimedia type of feel. And then I'll take something like a kneaded eraser, point out its edge, and I'll do something like that, and then I'll rework that maybe with another pencil. And by the end of it, you get some really nice blends that are pretty smooth and bring out a lot of the texture in the paper. So this is just a small example. I'm not going to draw too much with these. But also for guides, I sometimes draw in blue, non-photo blue, and also red. Red being probably when red scans, if you're going to scan things on a scanner, it turns more black and has a little less subtlety than blue. Non-photo blue is one of those things that's more of a, I'm not sure if it's more of a thing of the past, but some people swear by it. It can still get picked up on the scanner glass. So like when you scan a drawing, depending on how severe the blue lines are, sometimes they'll get a little bit more picked up, and it's a little bit more work to filter them out in your process, in your pipeline in Photoshop. But every once in a while, just to draw rough guides, I still draw in red and or blue. So these are excellent things to have. It's kind of one of those things that is probably more of a derivative from the animation industry, and you know, maybe my time of drawing comics more than wanting to draw concept design. But pretty much if I'm going to paint over it, I'm not going to really worry about the idea of non-photo blue and whether or not it can be seen over pen line art or not. It's kind of relative, but it's always good to have blue and red to draw with. Things like also, I think I had one out, is a pencil holder with pencil. Now with this, you're going to have to buy the holder. I believe it's a 2.0 millimeter, and I use like 2B, and you can buy a package of refills. This is much cheaper than buying pencils in a lot of ways. It eliminates a lot of waste. Sometimes with wooded pencils, like even though I have some Stadlers around, I don't keep a whole lot of them around just for basic drawing. But finally, when you get down to the bottom of them, they run out because, you know, I mean, you can only stick it so far in the pencil sharpener. With this, I can use it clear down to about probably less than an inch. And what you do is you get yourself a sharpener, which I don't seem to have my sharpener on hand. It's actually sort of a rotational sharpener, but the whole lead fits inside of the pencil holder. So something like this is really great for drawing. Needed eraser, mono. I love to use mono erasers for drawing. Ever since I drew comics, I love to use these. And get yourself some stencils, a straight edge, maybe a triangle, brush for erasure, and artist white tape. Standard stuff to have, but since we're on the topic, you know, having that stuff on hand is really great. So I'm going to tear this off, and I'm going to have a short talk about some of the markers that I use. So, of course, with Copic, I use the Copic Sketch. It has a chisel, has a brush end. Everybody knows these. Good for thick line weight, good coverage, fills. You can also concept with them on the chisel end. And I think you get the idea here. You know, and then you have thick coverage here. By turning the chisel more flat and perpendicular to the surface, you can get an excellent fill. So when blocking stuff out, these are great. And some of the cool grays, I use these to get out some of the silhouettes of things that I draw and sort of play with forms. And so something like this, with later I would just use pen and come along as 0.7, do something like this. And before you know it, you have a completed line art, piece of line art with some line already attached. So something like this, which is great, because I can later take this and go with some other markers and fill out some of those volumes. Like if I take the C4 here, and flush out more volume to this shape and play with it. And then maybe over that I might take something like a blender or like a white colored pencil, and it becomes like more refined sketch off of that. So Copic Sketch, also Copic Wide. These are great They're a little awkward to hold, but if you get used to them, for general stuff, you can use them for large fills. Yep, see, I'm getting some smearing there. It's probably because the ink is not totally dry, and so that was one of the things that I was warning about. In keeping the cleanliness of your work, you want to be careful of stuff like that. That and your hand position when working with ink are key. But with something like this, I could easily go into Photoshop and probably even it out and edit it out and push the color back into a normal, more tonal way. But I use cool grays, some warm grays, and also the tonal grays, like these three here would be T4, T2, I believe, and T1, and this is more like an actual black tone, more than it would be sort of a warm or cool gray. I suppose it's a little bit more warm, but it's more tonal value to 100% black, just knocked down. So there are those, and besides Copic, I also use the Prismacolor markers. So used like so, you can probably get some nice coverage, gradation effects, depending on if you overlap, and you can use a blender to blend some of these shades together. So that's pretty much pens, brush pens, and technical pens that I like to use. Push these aside. Surface, I've been using the Canson XL paper. Now this stuff, amazingly enough, I walked into an Aaron Brothers and purchased this stuff. It was a fairly low price, but the quality of paper is really good. And if you've ever seen their other series of paper, I believe it was the Pro Layout marker paper, this stuff actually runs a little bit higher. It's a nice surface, but there's not really that much of a big difference in between the two. In fact, I dare say that the XL is a little smoother, a little harder. But try them out. By suggestion, off of Scott Robertson's material list, I picked up one of their Strathmore 400 series books. You can find these on Amazon. These are really nice. It's very toothy paper, somewhat off-white, and works well with marker as well. And when you get to studies like this, it really the marker ink really soaks in. Really good also with the Hi-Tech-C pens, because they leave a lot of ink behind, and the tooth really picks up the quality of the line that you're making. So it's always good to work with something like this. And the Cottonwood Arts book. Cottonwood Arts is local to California, and it's a really great maker of paper. I haven't had any issues with bleeding, or I believe this is also their D1 size. No bleeding when using marker. Really good for making silhouettes first and line work later. And I believe you could also probably use a little bit of wet media with this without too much in the way of buckling. Has a nice strap to it. It's pretty self-contained, nicely bound, beautifully bound. It's actually, I believe, stitch bound on the inside, stitch bound and glued. So check it out. Not too much in the way of a bend. So that pretty much carries materials. And very quickly, I wanted to leave you guys with some books that I found were an inspiration to drawing. First would be Terada Katsuya's book, Rakugaki. Now this is like, when I nearly crashed and burned when I came back to Japan, and when I did, this is the book that I had to throw in my suitcase to bring back. Like, I couldn't bring all of my books back, but this one definitely had to go in the suitcase first. It's a 1,000-page sketchbook, and if I was to open it, it is filled, riddled with amazing drawings and sketches. An amazing body of work. And Terada-san, thank you. The second book I wanted to talk about, which is really cool, is Juan Jimenez. Comics by Juan Jimenez have been an inspiration to me, especially a lot of his hard-boiled SF sci-fi stuff. He's old school. He's been around since the early days of heavy metal, or either, what is it, Metal Hurlant, I believe. He's one of the artists behind having done the Meta Baron besides Mobius. But some of his work is amazing. He does a lot of multimedia between pencil, pen, marker, wash work, I believe also maybe either watercolor or gouache, and just excellent detail, really a large, like almost sort of 80s sense of science fiction scope, very scenic, very mood driven panels. So check it out. This is a story called The Fourth Power, and that's again Juan Jimenez. This is published by DC the Humanoids or Humanoids Publishing. This was a recent acquisition. It's Ashley Wood and his Zombies vs. Robots. This is a great book, comic, but there's a lot of painted material. I love Ashley Wood's work. And his toys are even more awesome than than anything else. But great design, great, very dynamic, almost chaotic type of pen work. Interesting use of screen tone, and so there's a lot of really cool value and volume in his line work. Some areas where he's used brush, you can tell he's used brush or some type of pen, quilt pen maybe. This stuff is just classic, just classic. So definitely try out some of Ashley Wood stuff. I actually have a few of his books. Some of his folio books, like Tre Torino, have some of his larger illustrations. I believe it's like oil, or either oil or acrylic on panel. But it's great, and the photography of the pieces are really great. As you can see some of these, you can pick up some of the impasto on the surface, and some of the glaze and the stroke work. It's just beautiful to see. If you could replicate this digitally, that would be awesome. It's almost like some impressionistic stuff that I've seen before, but it's just it's more modern, I guess, in the modernist sense. But definitely check it out. One of my oldest influences, as far as my sketch work, has been Sid Mead. Awesome stuff, huge influence. He's basically the grandfather, to me at least, he's the grandfather of concept art and visual futurism. Definitely, this Century 2 book was a limited edition run. I think my wife got me for this for Christmas. Thank you, honey. And I really love this book because it's got some really great technical illustrations in it, concept pieces, painted gouache pieces. I think I once visited Sid Mead's studio in Hollywood once when I was a young man, and saw him standing at his drawing board painting, I think it was a Turn A Gundam piece for Bandai or something, and he was standing, no chair, standing, painting, and it was the most inspirational thing I had ever seen. But this book is chock full of great work, so if you can find it, Amazon it, actually it's a Design Studio Press book, so that's Scott Robertson again, strikes again with Sid Mead. And speaking of Scott Robertson, I cannot give praise enough to, and or talk about enough, the How to Draw book, Drawing and Sketching Objects and Environments from Your Imagination by Scott Robertson. Big fan of this book, and even for a seasoned pro, if you were to look at this book, there are a lot of well thought, well executed type of technical drawing techniques that are displayed in this book that really this book should probably become an institutional standard in teaching. I say that not just to boast, but or free advertise, but it really is a helpful book, and whenever I think about my drawing and maybe I can improve on this. This is one of the areas, especially within mechanical conceptual drawing, that hard surface material stuff that you really want to take a look at. There's some really great augmented reality and like 3D technical stuff in here, that environmental stuff, vehicles, cars, planes, anything that you can think of. This book will teach you a lot of foundation and perspective and get you thinking about scale, transference of scale, everything. This is great. This is a great book. Scott, my hat's off to you. And this of recent is probably one of my huge, more dynamic sketching influences. Kim Jung-gi out of South Korea. Besides, Terada Katsuya has also done a large format sketchbook. This book has been super rare. If you're not going to get it from South Korea, or can't wait to get it, if you're local to Los Angeles or maybe San Francisco or New York, and you have a Kinokuniya bookstore in your area, you might check with them. I actually found my copy in Kinokuniya as they stocked the book, and it seems to be fast selling in that bookstore, so definitely check it out. I haven't even counted the pages in this book, but it looks to be, from start to finish, 536 with a fold out at the end. I've actually seen this drawing on YouTube, I believe. Kim Jung-gi, you may know from his presentations at the most recent Massive Black event. Unfortunately, I didn't make that event or his signing. I really wish I could have. I think I was down with a cold when that happened. But it is also influential in being chocked full of everything that you could imagine being drawn. Animals, characters, backgrounds, vehicles. I think his experience in the Korean self-defense force has come through with a lot of his drawing expertise on soldiers or military weapons and hardware, but a very worldly type of drawing. It's not just specific to, say manga or anime, although it is influenced by that, I'm sure, but Kim Jung-gi exercises a truly great amount of drawing skill. I get inspired just looking at this book to actually, keep on drawing, keep on sketching. Anything under the hat, under the sun that I can get into my mind, I try to draw. So again, this is his 2013 sketchbook. Comes packaged in a silver foil box like so. Ran me about $95, I believe, but although costly, well worth it. So again, this will wrap up the demo for this, and thank you very much. Cheers. Have fun, guys.